engine running. Absolute genius.
Get this.
Welcome.
This is the show where we bring you
Science.
What that essentially means is
discoveries,
Advances.
questions,
Research.
technology.
Unbelievable.
Without further ado,
This is The Naked Scientists.
Hello and welcome to The Naked Scientists, the show where we bring you the latest breakthroughs in science, technology and medicine with me, James Titko. Today we've got Olympic fever. To mark the start of the Summer Games, we're looking at the sporting extremes athletes going for gold will have to wrestle with to have a shot at glory. There are concerns over extreme heat,
They talk about actually the fear of dying.
the psychological strain of extreme expectations,
several of them have the opportunity to medal. I encourage them not to deny that fact because you can't.
and extreme remedies for performance-hindering afflictions. Oh, wow. That's quite something.
From Cambridge University's Institute of Continuing Education, this is The Naked Scientists.
We begin with concerns about extreme heat at the Games. The Summer Olympics have been getting warmer, and heat physiologist Mike Tipton has warned that climate change is causing fundamental shifts in the safety of Olympic events, with the risk of some competitors collapsing and even dying.
The Tokyo Games was labelled the hottest in history with an air temperature of about 34 degrees Celsius and a relative humidity of around about 70%, both of which, of course, are very important in terms of your ability to regulate your temperature during exercise. And the estimation is that the Paris Olympics could surpass that, certainly in terms of temperature. That could mean that we'd be looking at air temperatures in the 40s. And to just put that in context, the best air temperature for people who are engaged in continuous activity is around about 11 degrees Celsius. It's a challenge to the physiology of the body that can result in pathophysiological consequences.
Let's launch straight into them then. What health risks are we talking about when it comes to competing in extreme heat?
So the direct effects are simply the fact that you become hyperthermic. If you stop all the heat from leaving the body and ask somebody to exercise moderately, they'll reach a dangerous level of heat content in about 20 minutes. You tend to go through the sort of warning signs of heat disorders, which will include things like muscle cramps, heat cramps, which are obviously affecting performance.
While this program is about sport at the extremes, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of less severe, because this is a spectrum really, isn't it, when it comes to the effects of heat on our physiology. But all of them are detrimental to the sport, because right at that less severe end of the spectrum, fatigue, those cramps, we're still going to see a diminished spectacle for the people who've paid a lot of money to come and see the events.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it's important to keep this discussion in the wider context. I mean, obviously, we don't want athletes to be injured or put in any way in hazard. But by the same token, of course, they also want to perform at the best of their ability. And when you start to talk about things like heat cramps and feeling faint and lightheadedness and bad decision making because of cognitive impairments, then that all has a direct effect on performance. And we tend to focus quite a lot on, firstly, endurance athletes producing lots of heat, understandably. But some of these changes, some lightheadedness, poor decision making, are going to affect all sports.
Exertional heat illnesses, heat stroke, for example, what's going on physiologically there for, in particular, people like endurance athletes in extreme heats?
It's compounded by dehydration, which is very easy, of course, to achieve in a hot environment when you've got somebody exercising and producing 1 to 2 liters of sweat per hour. And it's characterized by, therefore, blood pressure being lowered, lightheadedness, nausea, vomiting, headache, and you start to lose cardiovascular function. So you find blood pooling in dilated peripheral vessels. You have an impaired cardiac function, cardiac output, decreasing arterial pressure. It's not necessarily associated with a high, deep body temperature. It's much more to do with cardiovascular impairment. And the fact that when you perform in the heat, you're now obligated to send much more blood to the skin.
And these are obviously athletes with the most efficient cardiovascular systems in the world. So that makes it all the more shocking. From the conversations you've had with these athletes, what have been some of the remarks maybe that have stood out to you from how they feel about their requirement to compete in ever more extreme conditions?
It ranges from concern through to fear. I mean, we've had, and if people go and have a look at the report that we've produced, you'll see some of the interviews with the elite athletes where they talk about actually the fear of dying. You know, the tennis guys, Djokovic was talking about people dying. People are talking about being able to fry eggs on court. I mean, historically, the climate really didn't feature very much in the preparation of an athlete. They tended to concentrate much more on their nutrition and on their training. But certainly now, probably the number one concern on their list would be the climate. And that's something that's changed pretty radically in the last 20 or 30 years.
We'd love to be able to solve climate change. We're probably some way off being able to do that. In lieu of that solution, what other actions can we take to make sure, we maintain this greatest sporting spectacle on earth in the summertime, but keeping athletes safe at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. The number one thing would be to mitigate the climate change. Given that that's hopefully ongoing and very high on people's agenda, the next level you go to is the adaptation level. We can monitor the environments using WBGT, wet bulb globe temperature, which has a look at the radiant heat, the level of water vapor in the air, and the ambient temperature, measure the heat stress of the environment, and say, well, actually, this should be postponed, this should be cancelled. Physiologically, the best intervention is heat acclimatization. And within 7 to 10 days of about 90 minutes exposure a day, you can very significantly increase the circulating blood volume, which is essentially the coolant of the body. You can increase sweat production, decrease salt loss. People feel more comfortable. They can maintain lower skin temperatures, lower core temperatures.
Speaking of removing heat from the body, hold that thought just there, Mike. That was Mike Tipton, Professor of Human and Applied Physiology at the University of Portsmouth. And as he was saying, in a bid to acclimatise to the heat, sportsmen and women will frequently train in warmer weather. But sports scientists also believe that colder temperatures have a part to play in helping elite athletes to deal with the rigours of elite sport. Proponents of cold therapies like ice baths say that they help athletes' muscles recover faster and can boost their mood. As experts like Mike will tell you, there's credible rationale for these claims, but there are some gaps to be filled in the evidence, and then there are the unqualified benefits often bandied about, such as the purported link to improved immune function. There's also the danger of suffering cold shock in an open body of water, another kind of cold therapy, something avoided during a supervised session instead inside a cryo chamber, sleek and super cold contraptions which are set at minus 120 degrees Celsius and below. In the name of naked science, I stripped down to my trunks at the Light Blue Clinic in Cambridge, where Gosia Bieniek took me through the treatment. Hi, Gosia.
Hi, hello.
I'm sorry I'm a bit late. I'm
Don't
James.
worry. Hi, it's really nice to meet you.
While my cold therapy experience was to be facilitated by modern means in a high-tech cryo chamber, the healing benefits of exposing your body to extremely low temperatures has been posited for centuries. That's not to say it's for everyone though, and when I booked myself in at the clinic, I was asked to fill out a medical questionnaire online, making sure I had no underlying health conditions that might make me unsuitable for the treatment. On arrival, my blood pressure was taken. I was given protective clothing to shield my extremities, including thick socks, hat and gloves. And then it was time. The lovely people here at the Light Blue Clinic have made sure I'm fit and firing, healthy, ready to take on the cryo chamber. I'm faced with this enormous fridge. I'm being told there's a pre-chamber, which is going to go down to, what was it again? About
minus 60 Celsius.
Minus 60. That sounds quite cold enough if you ask me. But then I'll move on to the main chamber, which is looking at minus 120 degrees Celsius. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little nervous. But I've got a friend, Gary's here with me.
I am indeed, yeah. I've been into the cryo chamber before, so you're in safe hands. We're going to enjoy this experience, and you're going to benefit from all the things that you get out of the cryo chamber today.
Brilliant. Well, I can't take the recorder in with me. It will explode probably. But here goes. I'll see you on the other side. Setting foot inside the atmospheric main chamber, it took a while for the coldness to really make its mark, distracted as I was by the liquid nitrogen fog dancing over my body. A combination of nervous energy and the shiveringly low temperature caused me to turn into a bit of a chatterbox, which I was assured by cryo enthusiast Gary was a normal reaction. Thanks for putting up with me in there, Gary. It also meant that before I knew it, my 3 minutes was up. Gosia, I've just about come back round from my cryo chamber experience. Breathing's back to normal. That was quite something. I'm no elite athlete, but athletes are using this technique to aid with their recovery. How does it work?
So cryotherapy puts your body into shock, which means we pretty much induce fight and flight response. So with that, with the cardiovascular system, what happens is that the blood goes back essentially to the heart to protect internal organs, and there isn't really much circulation in the peripheries.
So the idea is to reduce inflammation. Am I right in saying?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. When you come out, you get vasodilation. So you get redistribution of blood, so you get more nutrients in, more oxygen in. So the pain threshold shifts as well because the inflammation goes down. So if there is any muscular pain for the next 24 hours, it shouldn't be that noticeable. Mm-hmm. From endocrine system point of view, what happens is that we get endorphins in as well. So it helps with regulating your mood in the most natural way that you can actually imagine. The only thing is that it only lasts up to 24 hours, so you kind of have to reset your system on a more regular basis. But we have clients using it twice a week. We have clients using it once a week. With the athletes, we really want to get the timing right. Providing they do nutrition and sleeping and all of the basic recovery right, then this can really elevate the recovery.
So improved muscle soreness, improved mood, better sleep.
Yeah.
Is longer better? You're talking about the athletes there and you wanting to get the time specifically right.
With the gold standard, we're talking about 3 minutes, 30 seconds, but we also check the skin temperature before you go in. So that's one of the indicators, well, the major indicator for us to know if that actually worked, and you're going to get all of the acute responses and benefits that we talked about. So we check the skin temperature on the knee, and then we check it on your trapezius as well before you go in, and we expect the drop to be around 10 Celsius when you come out. But yeah, the skin temperature is the indicator for us that tells us if the 3 minutes worked or if we have to try and encourage them to go in for another minute.
That huge chamber I was in, very high tech, very cool. What's the advantage of a cryo chamber over an ice bath, say?
Yeah. So it's optimizing the time under which you have to be uncomfortable in order to get the full benefits.
And I can confirm there was a bit more of a spring in my step after my visit to the Light Blue Clinic. Thanks to Gosia Bieniek for taking me through it and for the better night's sleep I enjoyed. You're listening to The Naked Scientists with me, James Titko. Still to come, what sort of extreme diets and nutrition plans do our top athletes put themselves through? But first, we're going to take a closer look at the mental attributes that athletes need to perform at their absolute best. In recent years, greater emphasis has been placed on sports psychology among professional athletes, but, in the mind of our next guest at least, it's still a relatively underappreciated field. Jim Taylor is the author of Train Your Mind for Athletic Success, a sports psychologist who's worked with some of the top teams in US sport.
Everybody will say that the mind is as or more important than the physical and technical aspects of a sport. Yet, if you look at how much time and money they devote to it, it's a very small amount, if nothing. Unfortunately, athletes are not approaching mental training the same way they do physical training. Too often, people come to me when they already have a challenge, they already have a problem. But that's like going to a conditioning coach after you've got an injury. And so I try to convey to the athletes I work with in all my writing and speaking that the mind is made up of muscles. And that just like physical muscles, mental muscles, they can be weak, they can be strong, and they can be injured. But they need to be trained just like physical muscles.
Why is it, do you think, that we are so far behind in this domain? Is it because it's harder to measure the psychological benefit you're endowing? Is there good evidence that mental training really works?
Yeah, so there are two issues here. First of all, just the stigma of psychology. And that's why I call it mental training, because when people think of psychology, they think of mental illness and lying on a couch and getting shrunk and all those kind of things. So there's sort of a cultural bias against it. Then, James, going to your next point, the point you made about the fact that you can't measure it. So if you think about conditioning or technical work, you go into the gym, you see how much weight you can put on the bar, you see how high you can jump, how fast you can run, you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it. Whereas the mental side, it's like grabbing onto fog. And because it's not tangible, you can't see confidence, you can't see motivation directly, you can't measure it. So a lot of my work is making the intangible tangible. And the fact is, there's a large body of evidence that various types of mental training works.
What techniques do you work on?
First, I do an assessment. And just like conditioning coaches do physical assessments, I do a mental assessment where I have a list of what I consider to be all the major areas that impact athletic performance. And I see where their strengths and weaknesses are. So it might be maybe they're not as motivated as they can be, despite being at a high level. Maybe they lack confidence to fully commit themselves when it really counts. Perhaps they get too anxious pre-competitively, difficulties focusing, dealing with strong emotions. And then just through consistent training, mental training, getting these areas to become stronger, whether it's goal setting, positive self-talk, emotional regulation, physical regulation, visualization.
One of the most interesting things I find about sport is when someone does kind of break onto the scene and you'll hear commentators say they've got this freedom or they're playing with no fear. And in a sense, that's their psychological advantage, that they don't come to it having suffered setbacks as much.
Absolutely. So when you have a young athlete who comes onto the world stage, they have nothing to lose because nobody expects anything of them. But expectations is one of the most important areas that I work with athletes. And this is what I'm doing with these Olympians I'm working with heading into Paris is it's okay to have goals. And so several of them have the opportunity to medal. I encourage them not to deny that fact because you can't. The media is going to be covering them, talking to them about the possibility of medals. But for me, there's a big difference between expectations, which creates pressure, and goals, which is something people want to strive for. It's a very different psychological, emotional, and physiological reaction. What direction you go when you're threatened by something? You run away. When you're challenged by something, what direction you go? You go toward the challenge.
We've heard about the extreme conditions that are likely to be in place for the upcoming Olympics, the heat being the most obvious. That will no doubt have an impact on how athletes feel physically. But how do higher, or maybe in some cases extreme lower temperatures, affect the mind too, and how athletes approach their event?
Well, here's the interesting thing about this. And I just literally finished an article about this and talking about adversity, difficult, challenging external conditions like heat, like cold, like wind. And the fact is that these extreme conditions, they're not the issue. I'm a high-level age group triathlete. I've never been in a triathlon where there was only a headwind on me, or it was only hot for me. Everybody has the same conditions. So it's not the conditions that matter. It's how athletes respond to them. And so it's really the attitudes that athletes have. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's going to be hot, but it's hot for everybody. And so how do I deal with it?
Sports psychologist Jim Taylor there. The final aspect of sporting science we want to explore is the fuel that athletes run on. Sportsmen and women are, like the rest of us, what they eat, and extreme nutrition plans are very much part and parcel of modern sport. But as I found out when I went to meet Caroline Collard, a Cambridge-based health coach and writer, the dietary needs of the athletes we so idolise can be used to sell us food products in the supermarket we don't really need. And Caroline was kind enough to provide some samples for me to try to illustrate her point when we met up for a chat.
Yes, well, my triathletes, obviously, we are very much focused on consuming whole foods as much as possible where we can. So when we're talking about slow release energy, which they need at certain times of the day, so breakfast, depending on what time, obviously, they're training or what time they might be competing, we'd be looking at having an oat-based breakfast, things like overnight oats, maybe with fruit, particularly bananas, which are really good. And then throughout the day, because they burn so many calories, triathletes and endurance athletes, athletes, they need to really be considering fats, because they will go into that fat burning zone a lot quicker than your average exerciser, for example, who will mainly just be burning off carbohydrates, whereas triathletes get to their fat storage quite a lot quicker because their body has adapted. So we have to make sure that in lunches and things they're getting healthy fats, obviously, things like avocado, yes, meat, fish and eggs, also things like coconut, and you can add that to breakfasts as well. But they also want to, again, get in additional slow release carbohydrates, so things like whole grains, legumes, beans and peas and things like that, until obviously they then have to think about what they're using for fast carbohydrates, either just before the event. You can have things like the gels, so those are going to get into their system extremely quickly, and maybe some nuts and some dried fruit. And of course, they do use things like protein bars, so the protein bars can keep them, again, satiated. They also have a good mix of carbohydrates and fats in them a lot of the time as well.
Interesting you mentioned protein, because it feels like something of a overnight sensation, the amount of products you'll see in the supermarket using it as a sort of marketing ploy. They have it front and center of their packaging, advertising the protein content, pitching it at people who are doing a lot of exercise or looking to improve their fitness.
High protein diets are becoming a little bit of what I would actually almost describe as an extreme diet. Obviously, there have been all sorts of extreme diets over the years, your juice diets, your sugar-free diets, your raw paleo diets. And we've also had things like, this is the superfood, this is the food you need to eat. And we go through these phases, and it's often all down to marketing. And protein, it is extremely important, and more so as we age, because we just need to retain more muscle mass. But for people who are either athletes or just your general exercisers, it is not going to help you to gain muscle unless you actually do the work, obviously. And most people get enough protein in their diet in general, and they're essentially getting too much. And all that is giving them is extra calories.
Can you give advice on what products are those false friends that we might come across in the supermarket, which ones to avoid? Is there potentially anything in the box of goodies you brought along today that might provide some tips?
As you can see, I have a really big box of examples that I use with clients. I've actually got an example here of a protein flapjack, which is cherry Bakewell flavour. It contains 17 grams of protein, but obviously when you look on the ingredients list on the back, it's full of extra sugars, additives, fats that you perhaps don't need in your diet. In comparison to a protein flapjack that I might make for myself, I've brought an example here with me today for you to try, James. So it has got in it oats. It has just got fruit, so mixed berries, and it has got a scoop of plain soya protein powder. So why don't you have a try to see how that tastes?
You're very kind.
I know there is a massive difference between what that tastes like that you're eating right now, and obviously the cherry Bakewell protein flapjack that you can see in front of you. They taste so sweet, and our brains are automatically telling us this is a really delicious product. But actually, when we compare it to what you've just eaten there, okay,
which is delicious. By the way.
Thank you. So kind, so kind. We get used to that hyper sugary taste. And so therefore doing something like the homemade one that you've just tasted there is just not as appealing, because it's not setting off those happy hormones in our brains that are telling us, oh, this is extra amazing.
That's been very illuminating. I've learned something new there about protein and the various ways in which it's being sort of weaponized almost in selling as products. There's one more sample on the table, and I have to admit, it's made me a little bit apprehensive just because of its pungency.
Okay, so this last taster for you today, James, is actually pickle juice. In the UK, we tend to obviously call them, kind of comes from gherkins. It is actually something that athletes have used for a very long period of time. One of the things that's beneficial for is for cramps. So cramp has been very much studied a lot in the past, and there's never been many really solid conclusions as to why people actually get cramp.
For people who aren't familiar with a cramp, that sudden pang, what's the physiology, what's the mechanism, what's going on in the muscle when a cramp occurs?
Essentially, it is when your muscles are feeling like they're contracting as hard as they possibly can, which is actually quite painful. vinegar that's in the pickle juice really does help with rapid pain relief. And the other thing that is hydrating about something like pickle juice especially is that it also contains electrolytes. So electrolytes are really good for helping to get water into muscles and provide essential minerals that we need in the muscles to recover, for example. Now's the time to have a little taste, James.
It feels like we put it off long enough. Here goes, I guess.
Just think of all those electrolytes and antioxidants.
Oh, wow. That's quite something. I mean, along with the whole raft of health benefits you were mentioning, one of them was pain relief. I mean, it's part of the equation there that you're just distracting yourself with a different kind of unpleasantness.
Yes, and I think what you've got to remember is the majority of people who might use this as a tactic for hydration really has extremely good discipline, and they will be consuming that neat. They actually have to drink around a third of a cup, probably, or certainly more than what you can see in this example.
For reference, I managed a measly sip. Measly as it was, given I wasn't actually suffering from cramp, it was quite enough. That was Caroline Collard, personal trainer and nutritionist, giving us some food for thought and more physical activities as well. As the starting gun for the Olympics rings out, I hope we've shown you how science is guiding success on sport's biggest stage. From contending with minus 120 degree cold therapy to the drinking of rancid pickle juice. Let's just hope these extreme measures result in extreme entertainment. Next time, Titans of Science returns. Chris will be speaking with the world-leading astronomer Jerry Gilmore, a key figure in the Gaia mission, discoverer of the galactic thick disk, and dark matter hunter. I hope you can join us then. The Naked Scientists comes to you from the University of Cambridge's Institute of Continuing Education. It's supported by Rolls-Royce. I'm James Titko, and from everyone here at The Naked Scientists, thanks for listening, and until next time, goodbye.